Frank, it's so great to connect today. I came across your podcast, Crazy Good Turns, thanks to a mutual guest we've had, Dan Heath. And so it's so great to connect with you today.
Yeah, Dan is terrific. I'm glad you listened to the episode with him, and glad you're a fan of his.
You know,
He's well worth listening to and
it's
reading.
it's interesting. We fell in love with Dan about the same time when Made to Stick was released. And I love that book. I read all his books. I try to apply so many of these topics. And so it was cool to see that connection that you had with him. And then the more, of course, I started learning about your work, I just thought it would be so fun to talk with you. And so Frank, as you think back on your experience in leadership, do you have any experience that you would most want to pass on to others? Something you learned that you would most want to share with others?
I thanks for the question, Nate. It's a great question. I do. So a little bit of background on myself for people who might listen to this. I was the CEO of Home Depot for 8 years. Before becoming CEO, I have to say I never thought I would be a CEO. I didn't think much about leadership, and I didn't have a theory of the case on how to lead an organization, never mind an organization as large as Home Depot, which at the time was around 400,000 associates, employees, and now it's 500,000. And uh, I won't describe how I got to this conclusion, but my conclusion from the 8 years is the single most unappreciated tool that leaders have is their own recognition and gratitude expressed to the people who are working for them. And doing that in a way that is memorable for the people that you're recognizing and celebrating. So as a leader, you have a point of view of what you want folks to do. And when you stop and think about how do I express what do I want from the people who work for me, I came to the conclusion, and I believe it's true because I saw it over 8 years, was the way you express that is you literally or figuratively bring somebody or some people up to the stage and say, let me tell you a story about what Joe or Jane did and why it is so great. And there are lots of different forms of recognition and celebration. That's just one form. I did lots of different forms, but is that tying of a specific story to what it is that you want that does a couple of things. The first is it's memorable. So if I tell a story about what someone did in Home Depot's case, I spent a lot of time recognizing and celebrating great customer service. If I just say to somebody, I want you to provide great customer service, that sort of vaporizes
Yeah.
instantaneously. If I
Yeah.
give a story around great customer service, everyone understands that. They understand, okay, now I think I understand what the leadership, what Frank wants me to do. And it becomes reinforcing because the stories reinforce themselves. Somebody in the audience is saying, gosh, I do that all day long. I don't think Frank knows that. And so people start talking about what they're doing, and it reinforces itself, and you gain real momentum within an organization. My phrasing on this is every business leader knows the sentence of you get what you measure,
Mm-hmm.
which is very true. In a business, it's hard to make progress along any vector if you haven't figured out how to measure it and how to determine whether you're making progress. My corollary is you get what you recognize and celebrate. So show me what an organization recognizes and celebrates, and I will show you what that organization does and how it behaves. And more often than not, leaders are unintentional and undisciplined about how they recognize and celebrate their employees. That's
This
it.
this is just fantastic, and I've got a number of thoughts. One of my very first experiences with the power of recognition was during my postdoc. I did a postdoc at Notre Dame, and our department chair there was a man named Craig Crossland. And every week, Craig would write a newsletter that would celebrate everybody's
There
accomplishments,
you go.
and it was incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, and Craig was he was one of the best leaders I've ever had. And so much of his job was just celebrating people's accomplishments. Now, I've wondered if in an academic department with
Yeah,
maybe, 40, 50 people.
works anywhere.
But to hear you describe it and the impact that it had on Home Depot with
Yeah,
400,000
yeah,
people, to me, that just shows how powerful it is. And then the other thought I had that I think is so great is one of the other best leaders that I know. He runs he's the president of a company that owns about, well, they got about 20,000 employees and own about 700 restaurants. And whenever I interact with him, he tells stories.
yeah,
Everything is a story.
yeah,
Every conversation is a story. Every leadership meeting is a story. And so when I teach my students, we talk about the power of storytelling. And this also kind of goes back to Made to Stick, where Dan Heath talks about how stories are memorable. And so I
yeah,
try in every podcast I ever create, I try to share stories. Whenever I have a guest on, I ask them, in my email, like, please think of a story you can share.
right.
And so it's so cool to hear you tie these two things together. Uh, you get what you recognize and celebrate,
Yeah,
and then you do it through storytelling.
yeah. So I will give you just one background comment on why I came to that was so I'm new to the job as CEO, and I think about the great leaders for whom I've had the privilege to work. And one of them was George H.W. Bush. And I worked for him when he was vice president, was a really great experience because the vice president's staff is quite small. No one cares about the vice president. So you can see, what does this person actually do? George Bush, every day, he would start the day. Now, you got to go, I'm very old. So this goes back to 1981. People still have typewriters. And he would start every day spending an hour typing out notes, personal notes. And you knew it was his typewriter because the E wouldn't exactly align and stuff like that. But he'd spend his time writing notes. And when, as a staff member, you got a note from the vice president, you walked on air.
Yeah.
And I ended my time working for the vice president thinking I would walk through walls for this person. And subsequently in life, what I noticed was that power of sending notes, writing notes. When I was CEO at Home Depot, every Sunday I would spend half a day on Sunday writing 200 handwritten personal notes to associates in Home Depot, thanking them for something, that specific example of something they had done for great customer service. So it'd be, dear Joe or Jane, I heard that you did, and I would give the specific, and I would say, you're awesome. Thank you, Frank. And I know that those had an impact. And the first example of this was within a month or so, I'm walking a Home Depot store, and an associate comes up to me and says, I got a note from you. Thank you very much. Would you mind sending it to me again? Would you mind writing it out again? And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. But why? And he said, well, I got this note and we were all looking at it and we decided that it had to have been RoboPen. So
Yes.
we put it under water and the ink ran. So I need a new one. It is just surprise people by thanking them and do it in a specific way.
So I was just telling you before we hit record that I just recently interviewed Andy Reid, who just won
Yeah,
the Super Bowl, incredible
yeah,
leader. And he
must
talked
be.
about, he said, his key to leadership is being honest, staying calm, and being consistent. And I think that's all important. But then what he did the whole interview was just talk about how much he loves Travis Kelce, how much he loves Pat
Right,
Mahomes, how much he
right.
loves his players. And I
Yeah,
thought, I think that's the real key here,
yeah,
Andy,
yeah,
is that you love the people. And so, Frank, when you take a Sunday afternoon and you spend hours every week just showing people how much you love them, appreciate them, you're celebrating them, recognizing them. What an incredible lesson on leadership for anybody who wants to be there. There's many of us who don't. I teach leadership, and many of the students are concerned about their ability to lead. And so I think you are such a great example of somebody who figured it out by learning from others. And then this lesson you're sharing is just so easy to underappreciate how massively powerful it can be.
absolutely. I'll give you one other note just to
Please
end
do.
on, and that is for the people who are nervous about being a leader, and I was one of those. The other value of doing this is I use my baseball card analogy. So when I would hang out at a baseball park and get the cards signed by the ball players, by and large, the people who would hang around and sign the cards of little kids would be the utility
Yeah.
infielders who never saw time playing.
Yeah.
But when I had that card signed by that player, I wanted to root for that player.
Yeah, you're a fan.
So somebody who takes the time to recognize me, I'm already invested in them because they've invested in me. So it's a good lesson.
I love the story. I love the lesson. Frank, this is just, you far exceeded any expectation I could have ever had for somebody I just emailed out of the blue, especially. I just
I
really
love people who
appreciate
email out of the
it.
blue. Well done.
Well, thank you. It was so great to learn from someone who has had such an amazing career in so many different fields as well. We talked off air just a little bit about the legal background as well, which is a whole other experience and career.
Yeah.
So many amazing things you've been able to accomplish. And I just love you take the time to share these fantastic lessons with me and listeners today. So thanks so much, Frank Blake.
Thank you, Nate.